Well, that's true. You have the talent to do this. You do. All right, Denzel, let us have it.
All right. So the audience that I'm going to be speaking to today is my motivational speaking class.
It's what?
My motivational speaking class.
Oh, so us?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love y'all.
Awesome.
I don't have to change. I appreciate that.
Yes, I love you guys just the way you are.
Good.
Are you ready, Grandpa?
I am.
Awesome.
They've already built it, so
So in 2009, I had what I like to call a prophetic dream. In this dream, in my family, is me, my sister, and my father, and my mother, of course. So my mother, sister, father, me. And in this dream, we were in this deserted parking lot area, and there was this huge, I would say maybe like 10-foot Grim Reaper-like type of thing that was coming after us. As it was chasing us, it came to a point where my sister and my mother ran one direction, I ran one direction, my father ran one direction, and the Grim Reaper ran after him. I woke up in like a very cold sweat sort of thing, screaming. By this time we were living in Ohio, in a house actually, had my own room and everything. And my parents came to see me, they're like, what's wrong, what's wrong? And I was like, oh, it was just a bad dream. But, you know, being African and everything, and Christians, of course, my parents take dreams very seriously. So after I told them, like, you know, what happened in the dream and everything, they were like, okay. So about, you know, for the next 2 weeks, they were praying with me. They kept on asking, have you had any more dreams? Have you had any more dreams? I'm like, no, it's all right. No, it's just a nightmare. It's cool. About 3 weeks later, driving home from church one day, it was just me, my sister, and my dad in the car. My dad randomly asked, so, would you two like to move back with us to Ghana? And I was like, no! And then my dad was like, okay, good. And that caught me off guard. I was like, good? Because usually, you know, especially being Africans, they're always saying like, you have to go and you have to go back to where your house is from, and you know, you have to enjoy it, you have to see where you're from. It's a beautiful place. But this time my dad's like, good. I'm like, okay, what do you mean by good? Long story short, my dad and my mother had been working to get their green card and visa to stay here from the moment that they came back, or from the moment they came into the US. And apparently it was reaching a point where they were being denied everywhere, that my dad was now appealing to the Supreme Court. And he asked me, at the time, I believe I was about 15 or 14, he asked me, he bombed all of this news on us, and my sister immediately got very concerned. And he said pretty much that if things don't go well, him and my mom are gonna have to go back to Ghana, and we might have to go back with him. So his plan was for me to go to the Supreme Court with him pretty much to appeal. You know, as a young child, like I needed my parents here, etc. Because we were born here in the US. So a few months later, like I had done a whole bunch of things throughout the process. I actually wrote to Obama. I wrote to Oprah, I wrote to Pastor T.D. Jakes, and Obama actually did write me back. I believe it was him. He did sign saying Obama and everything. And pretty much it was too late by the time. But long story short, December came around. Well, actually January 2015 came around, early January 2015. And my father went to the immigration office. Now, he had been going there for, you know, a couple of months. And every time we'd go there as a family, then he would go into this room, come back out, and then 45 minutes later, well, not 45 minutes, 20 minutes later or so, then they would tell him like, oh, well, you know, just come back on a later date. This time, I remember literally playing my Nintendo DS, Pokemon, just, you know, like, oh, it's gonna be the same old, but this time my dad walks in for 45 minutes, and instead of him coming out, it was a police officer, and he comes to me, my sister, and my mom, and he's like, so Daniel Menso would be held, arrested, in jail until we can get him the next flight back to Ghana. And immediately my mother and my sister started crying. And I was like, wait, what? You can't just do this. Like, he didn't even do anything. Like, he's about to become a pastor. Like, when he becomes a pastor in a couple of months, then he should be eligible or whatever, right? And the police officer is like, I'm sorry. Would you guys like anything, like a ride back home? And I can just tell you guys that that was literally one of the hardest moments, probably the hardest moment in my entire life, especially because from that moment I had to transition from being a young 14, 15-year-old boy to the man of the house quickly. My mom at the time was considering suicide because my dad was the bread maker for the house that we had. It was a really big house, not to boast, but we were very grateful for that house. Eventually came to the point where we had to move back to New York in this cramped apartment that we still live in right now with my auntie, my grandpa, her 3 children, my grandmother, and my uncle. I have to share a bed now with my sister, my cousin, and my mom when she's home at times. It's very tough. And at this time, I remember just always thinking to myself, like, God, why? My dad was the most godly man that I know. Why would you allow this to happen to him? To keep things brief, I like to also think of the story with Joseph. Joseph once had a dream, and he dreamt that the whole solar system pretty much bowed down to him. And then he went and he told his family about it. You know, like, guys, look at what I dreamt. You know, the solar system, this, you guys were in it too. Y'all were bowing down to me. And his brothers are like, oh yeah, okay. And they tried to kill him at first, and they're like, you know what, instead we're gonna sell you. Pretty much from the moment that Joseph had that dream and revealed it, all hell broke loose in his life. And Joseph, we think that we go through problems. I think, honestly, that Joseph had almost every right to be like, God, why? You give me this dream that the solar system is going to bow down to me, that this is going to happen, that that's going to happen. And then for, I think even a decade, I believe, Joseph went through hell. He was accused by Potiphar's wife. He rejected her offer to have sex. Like, you know, if I was Joseph, I probably, man, I should have done it in the first place then. You know what I mean? But Joseph, he rejected it, and he was still accused of trying to make a move on her. Potiphar believed him, threw him in jail, believed his wife, threw him in jail, all of that. And Joseph, even in jail, even throughout this whole entire process, he still continued to trust God. And then for those of you who read the story, in the end, his brothers, those who actually betrayed him, they came to him. And they didn't recognize him at first, but by this point, Joseph had become a king. And he was ruler. He was capable, from everything that he had been through, had allowed him to appreciate what he was now living. And it also gave him the perspective that what he told his brothers, like, what you guys meant for evil, God made it to work out for good. And this kind of like goes with the whole theme of my speech today. That honestly, I know that we as college students, we go through a lot of things, we have gone through a lot of things, but we do not know the purpose of today's events until perhaps tomorrow. And I think that especially as Christians, this is the upper advantage that we have. Our lives are being governed by God. I'm glad that my life is not in my hands because I'll soil it. But God not only knows what's best for us, but he wants what's best for us. Proverbs 3, verse 5-6 says that trust in God with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. He will direct your path. Romans 8:28 says that all things, that means including bad, work together for good for those who love God and are called to his purpose. I believe that we are all called to his purpose. I believe that we do genuinely love God. So sometimes things are going to happen in your life that you will not understand and that you will like to go and just be like, God, why? But then in the long run, if you try and keep that perspective of God, I'm going to trust you. I know that you're good. I know that you love me. I can guarantee that at the end of the day, maybe not literally at the end of the day, but when this time has come for that purpose to be revealed, you'll be thankful that you even went through that process. Because like Joseph, you will now be able to appreciate where you are. To be honest, I do not know all the reasons why God allowed whatever to happen to my dad to happen. I haven't seen him since 2012 when I went to go visit him. And my mom hasn't seen him since 2010. Because she had still been working on her green card and everything as well. But what I can say is, I believe that if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have got saved. If it wasn't for him leaving. Because it wasn't until that year that I was seemingly like under his umbrella. But it wasn't until that year when he was deported and everything, and I went to New York, I got discipled, I started having to like take up on my own responsibility. And I would honestly wouldn't even be able to come to this school if it wasn't for him being deported. So in a sense, it's not necessarily that I'm glad that he was deported, that for the past 10 or 7 years I've been, away from him and I haven't been able to learn from him. But there's a lot of positives that came from it. And I believe that one day more of that purpose will be revealed. And I just want us to have that perspective for many of the troubles that we go through in our lives. Thank you for listening.
His time is 10:22. So is your dad still overseas?
Yeah, he's still at Ghana. Yeah.
Have you ever visited him?
All right, we better get out of here.
Yeah. I went to London, where he's able to go everywhere except for the U.S.
Oh, okay.
But he was in London in 2012, so I went to go visit him there for the summer. We went to France, Germany, and yeah, it was a lot of Olympics.
Was that the last time you saw him though?
Yeah.
Was that hard?
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Oh, that's like 5
Very
years ago.
Yeah.
Dang, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Will he ever be able to come back?
We're working on it. Yeah.